But I was a bit surprised because it was a kind of moment of triumph for Michael. And it was a moment of complete disaster for me, really. And we'd always got on quite well, although we'd been opposed on the drink driving issue. And I was a bit surprised that he kind of took the opportunity to dance on my grave. It's quite unusual for politicians not to be quite magnanimous in that situation. They usually say, look, he's been beaten, he's done his job, and good luck to him in the future, or something like that, which maybe they don't mean, but they say it. Michael didn't say that. Michael said, it's the best thing that's ever happened in Irish politics.
Hello and welcome to the Southern Star's Coronavirus Podcast. I'm the news editor, Siobhan Cronin, and this week's podcast is an interview with well-known politician, journalist and author Shane Ross. Shane's father was from Cork, and he has devoted a large portion of his book In Bed with the Blueshirts to his relationship with Cork Southwest TD Michael Collins, which started out very amicably but ended with Collins apologising for a scumbag remark he made the day that Ross lost his seat after last February's general election. He talked about that incident and much more when he spoke to me earlier. So, Shane Ross, delighted to have you here today. And tell me, am I right in thinking that your father was a Cork man?
Yeah, well, he was born in Cork, and he was his name was John Ross, and in fact, he was his company was quite a well-known name. With his family company, it's called Nat Ross Cork.
Oh, I know it well. When we moved from Clare, they carried all our goods to Cork.
That's right.
So there you go.
That's who they were. Now he was the cap, and they were bought over, I think, in the late 1980s in the end by another company. So they're not operating it under that name now. But his father owned that company. Now but my father's father married twice. It's a terrible thing when you've got a family company. And my father was not, as a result. The eldest son was someone else, and was someone else's was his stepmother's son, obviously, of the first marriage, who died. And so he didn't actually inherit the family firm, which was a matter of great regret to us, because it was a pretty good company at the time. And when he was born in 1919, and he actually went off then his father died, and then he went off as a child with his mother to England, lived in England for a very, very, very long time. But he's a Cork man, yeah, and it was his memories of Cork, even as a child, which brought him back to Ireland. That's why he actually came back to live in Ireland, because he was so happy living there. So yeah, I've got good credentials for being
just good to
on
say
your program, all right.
Some good DNA, all right. What part of Cork? I suspect it might be North Cork. Am I right?
I think they lived in Carabini.
That's close enough. That's on the border of West. We'll take that.
Yeah. That's right. So, and he had really, really good memories of it. So, if he hadn't gone, I could have been representing the people of Cork instead of Michael Collins.
Cork South Central, I
think,
maybe.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You'd have a lot of company there in that constituency. Now, tell me, the name of your new book is In Bed with the Blueshirts, which gave me a little giggle because, of course, you have been in bed with the Blueshirts because you're a former FGer yourself. So how do they feel about poacher turned gamekeeper writing about them as if you were never tainted by them?
No, it's something of which I think both parties are ashamed. I think they're ashamed of the fact that I was ever a member of the Fine Gael, and I'm not really pleased with the fact that I was. It was a very long time ago. It was in the early 1990s. And I joined Fine Gael and I stood for them. I was a county councillor for Fine Gael in Bray in County Wicklow. And then I stood for the Dáil and didn't succeed. And then we had, as often happens to me in politics, we had a split, and I just returned to being an independent. That Fine Gael element was just a kind of bit of an event in my life. It didn't work out very well, and I think the explanation for that is very obvious. I've always been rather independent, undisciplined politician in many ways, and so when I joined, I didn't find it very easy to accept all the kind of disciplines the party with, the structures, etc. So it didn't really work very well. And the same thing happened to some extent when I got into cabinet with them. There was a difference of culture. I was still thinking he's an independent, and they still thought of Fine Gael. But our relationships were very good on a personal basis on the whole, on both occasions. But structurally, it was difficult to make it work.
Right. So you were happier camper as an independent then?
Yeah, much.
Right.
Much. I mean, that's not to say that political parties are wrong or anything. It just say that it doesn't suit some people.
Right. Yeah. Now, the new book, you have a chapter in it called Drunk Drivers Divide the Dole, and it opens with Michael Collins' now infamous scumbag comment, which he made at a rally, I think, when he came back that evening down here in West Cork. And we're going to take a little clip from that speech now.
Shane Ross is in the scrap heap of Irish politics. One of the biggest scumbags that ever entered Irish politics. He ruined rural Ireland. I said it every chance I had above the Dáil, and I said I'd do everything I could to take that man down because he ruined rural Ireland. And tonight, the great people of Dublin took him out of it. And God bless him.
Right. So you heard there Michael Collins speaking.
I didn't hear that actually, but it doesn't matter. I know what he said anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think you remember it because you
I do.
In the book it says how the tweet came up on your Twitter feed from a very familiar face, and immediately you were hooked and you were very shocked. Now, what I thought was very surprising, because I remember you saying it at the time.
Yeah.
That you seem to be shocked by the word scumbag. And I thought, now, for a man who's been in the Seanad, a man who's been in the newsroom of the Sunday Independent, which I have myself, a man who has been through the thick and thin of politics, were you really offended by that word, or was it because it was coming from a man you thought was a friend?
I'm not sure about shocked is right. I was surprised. Yeah. I'm not sure offended. No, I don't get really offended, but I thought it was most unusual because we had been opposed politically for on one issue alone, really. Although they'd kind of a few of them had demonized me as saying I wasn't, I'd ruined. I think in that speech he said I'd ruined
rural
Ireland, which was a bit of hyperbole. But I was a bit surprised because it was a kind of moment of triumph for Michael. And it was a moment of complete disaster for me, really. And we'd always got on quite well, although we'd been opposed on the drink driving issue. And I was a bit surprised that he kind of took the opportunity to dance on my grave. It's quite unusual for politicians not to be quite magnanimous in that situation. They usually say, look, he's been beaten, he's done his job, and good luck to him in the future, or something like that, which maybe they don't mean, but they say it. Michael didn't say that. Michael said, it's the best thing that's ever happened in Irish politics.
And that he had a bit of a vendetta against you, more or less said, for his whole career, to get you out. That was his top priority.
Yeah, I mean, it particularly because in the book, what I do say is, hey, look, we got on really well for a very long time. And that I come down to Cork and I print a lot of the texts which he sent me, right, which were very friendly and quite in contradiction to what he said that night. Now, he may have been a bit excitable in his triumph, and good luck to him for that. And he did really well to get in. It's difficult for an independent in that election. But
I think he was always, well, down here anyway, he was always a surefire winner on that occasion, so I don't think he had any doubt he was getting in. People might think you're a little bit naive as a politician to think that politicians don't say one thing to your face and another thing behind your back.
No, I know they do that, and I do it probably too. We all probably do that as well. But I think it's kind of good for people to know what happens, and that my surprise at him doing it was just so much in contradiction with when I met him. I don't remember having any disagreement with him in Leinster House off stage outside the Dáil chamber on the drink driving issue, actually. And I never remember anything except pleasantries. So that was kind of difficult. And I do refer in the book at some length to the trip which I had down. Michael asked me down to West Cork, and which caused, I think, a little bit of friction because obviously Jim Daly, I think, he was the TD at the time, and I was in bed with the Blueshirts. I wasn't in bed with Michael, but Michael I went down, and he was the host for the day. And there's always a bit of a problem about ministers when they visit constituencies, who's hosting them and who's not, and who's in the photographs and who gets the credit for what's delivered, etc. And I was down there definitely with Michael to some slip. I mean, Jim Daly didn't say anything about it, but I could feel a certain amount of awkwardness about it because I hadn't made contact with him. I don't think I made contact with him at all that day. But we had a great day, and he took me all around the place, you know, Bandon and Skull and various other places. Kind of.
I think Danny, the sitting councillor, accompanied you as well, and Danny is a publican. Yeah,
that's right. And that was, you know, but that wasn't any. That was, funnily enough, the bill was out and in the open at that stage, the drink driving bill, and he still ensured a great welcome for me down there. I didn't feel any of the hostility that people talk about. They say, you're hated in rural Ireland. That's not the case. But the bill was out, and Danny and he and I spent the day together, and we had a really good meeting with various people, various tourist groups, interest groups. We went to see all sorts of really, really important places, and we really had a long but very fruitful day. And I had texts from him afterwards saying, what a great welcome you got in Cork. You know, that I can read them to you, but I'm not going to. But they're in the book,
I think.
Yeah, and saying, you know, this shows what. And I was delighted. He said, you know, to be able to show them the hard work you do. Now that I'm only emphasising that because it contrasts so much with the speech he made that night of the election about this scumbag who was the worst thing that ever happened to Ireland, the Ministry, you know, etc. That I think should be confined to the Dáil chamber. I think that's what I'm saying. But yeah. I wish him well. I don't bear
and he
malice.
did apologise. In fairness, I think you were both on the radio.
Yeah, he did.
A few days later, and he did apologise for that. And he said it was in the heat of the moment, and he was a bit excited by his win.
That's fine.
But you also had a very stormy relationship, and I have to say, very amusing at times the way you describe it in the book with your junior minister, Patrick O'Donovan. Now, Patrick also has very strong links here. His brother is another publican in Bandon, so I suppose there was no surprise there that there may have been a bit of a stormy relationship with the man who the publicans believe was out to get them. But tell me a little bit about that relationship, because between a senior and a junior minister, for it to be quite so toxic is rare enough, I think.
It was pretty bad for quite a long time. Yeah. You see, it was funny because when Enda appointed me, our relationship wasn't very good at that stage either. I don't seem to get on with anybody from what's happening in this program, but that wasn't the case. And we got on very well later, Enda and I. It was fine then afterwards. But when he appointed me, he just gave me the transport portfolio, right? He said, there you are. You're getting the transport. He didn't consult me at all about what he was going to give me. He just said, you're getting transport. I can't remember whether he mentioned sport and tourism, but that's part of the portfolio as well. And he appointed Patrick as well, Patrick O'Donovan, as Minister of State, and sport and tourism. But he never consulted me about that either. He just said, you know, which I think is unusual.
Is it unusual? Or that always comes a few days later, am I right, anyway? So you wouldn't have known maybe on the day,
It does come later, that's right. He probably had it in mind. I can't actually remember whether he told me Patrick was going to be appointed that day or not, but I don't think he did. But then he appointed Patrick, he didn't tell me, and that's fine. I mean, the Taoiseachs can do what they like. Taoiseach can do what they like. But why didn't it work? Well, there was a kind of view around that I needed watching, and they were going to put in a kind of Fine Gael Minister of State to keep an eye on me, right? And that was something I was suspicious of, maybe wrongly, because Patrick wasn't doing that at all, but I was kind of suspicious of. And there appears to be sometimes, because of Michael Ring's strength, he was Patrick's predecessor, a little bit of tension of what they call the responsibilities of the ministers of state. And Michael had a huge presence in the sports and the tourism portfolio. And Patrick felt that I wasn't giving him the same amount of kind of leeway and discretion as Pascal had given to Michael Ring, right? Now, they were the same party, so it's probably rather easier, and there are lots of points of tensions, often in their particular sports grants and areas like that. And I think Patrick felt that maybe, and he may be rightly, that I was taking too much responsibility. But in my defense, I should say that we had exactly the same written office notices, which is the way it's done, as the the two before us had, and the relationship was formally certainly the same.
So that means that he had the same responsibilities as his predecessor.
Yeah, that's what I mean, exactly.
But he did usurp you on a few occasions, did he not? He kind of got in ahead of you on a few announcements.
Yeah, he did. Yes, there's always that type of a problem, and the senior minister is the senior minister. Basically, that's the relationship, and things like that should be decided by them. But what I think he felt was that I wasn't generous enough about them, that I took the good things to myself, and that he wasn't given enough of them. I don't think it's true, but you know, there are some sports events which are very coveted. But we all went to the kind of the kind of perks of that office of going to the matches.
The big ticket matches, the big internationals, and
it's wonderful. But we both went to all those, etc. But there were areas where I think I turned up where he felt it should have been him and him there alone, and that would have been what the arrangement with the predecessor, that sort of thing. And he was probably entitled to that. It's a difficult relationship, and that didn't work very well. There was one point where I did feel he went a bit overboard, and we had a really big row when he announced a major change in sports policy on gender quotas without consulting anybody at all. The first I heard of it was on Morning Ireland, and I was kind of driving, and I heard that sports policy changed quite dramatically.
And I think you said the civil servants didn't even seem to know about that one.
No, they didn't. Nobody knew about it at all. So I had to reverse that, and that was difficult. When your Minister of State does something and you don't agree with it, which is what happened, and he announces it all over the airways and all of the newspapers. He did a campaign to do it, and I had to, by the end of the week, basically reverse the whole thing. That made life difficult, and maybe I didn't do that very tactfully. But
you were also prone to a few gaffes, I think, Shane, in the sports department between Katie Taylor and Rob Carney and a few others, which you do, in fairness, document in the book. You're not trying to hide them. Do you put that down to just being a little bit distracted, or it's just part of your personality? Is it that you just? I was prone to, there would be about a dozen gaffes, famous ones. I mean, that's quite a lot, really.
Yeah, but they weren't serious ones. Some of them were wrong, actually, but that doesn't matter. Some of them actually weren't gaffes at all, or I didn't do them, and all sorts of things like that. But one or two, the Katie Taylor was easily the most famous one, and I was kind of caught red-handed there. I wanted to be photographed with her, and so I stuck to her. And the story became that I wanted to be photographed with her, not what had happened when she came home, not her great victory, etc. And that was bad, and that was completely my fault. And I made mistakes about the Carney brothers. I called one, and I got them wrong, which it really isn't a big sin, but it's quite easy to do in a hurry. And I made a couple of other mistakes, and people started to kind of watch very carefully. But yeah, it's quite difficult sometimes when you're in a hurry on the radio or something like that. It was Twitter actually which did me in, really. I put something on Twitter, and that's what happened to the Carney brothers. I was in a real hurry. I said, with Johnny Sexton or one of the Carneys, blah, blah. I got the wrong Carney.
Did you not have a private secretary saying, please give me your phone? A bit like Mr. Trump, please give me your phone, Mr. Ross, and let me do your tweeting.
No, I was very bad at having people around me. Yeah, I tend to do things on my own because, the civil service like to know exactly what their minister's doing at every hour, every minute of the day. And that can be very claustrophobic. It can really annoy you. Where are you going now? Where are you going? When you want to go to the loo, they want to know how long you're going to be and all that sort of thing. And so I was very bad at that sort of thing, but I could have done with them on occasions when they weren't with me. Yeah, you're right. So I made a few gaffes. You're right. Yeah.
Well, I think, though, that in fairness to you, you do seem to have left politics and you don't feel like you've made any major enemies. I mean, I think you're on speaking terms with Patrick O'Donovan. It's not as if anything was too serious in the end. It was just the cut and thrust, really, of politics. But the one thing you were on a mission with, and I'm sure if you were there, you'd still be on a mission with, was judicial appointment system, which is very much in the news now at the moment. Yeah. But I'm always fascinated to know, you were like a dog with a bone on that one, I have to say, because you kept getting pushed back and you kept coming again and you kept getting pushed back, kept coming again. And this is the whole process by which judges are chosen and then appointed under the Irish system, which is up for massive debate at the moment. Why why that particular issue, Shane? You didn't particularly have a background in law or anything, and I was always very interested to know, what was it about that you just thought, we have to sort this?
I had a bit of a background in law. My father was a lawyer and was a solicitor, and I did solicitors up to the first level. Because it was wrong. And it is wrong. And I felt independence. One of the reasons why for the formation of the Independent Alliance was we thought we really could pretty well outlaw cronyism. In other words, people looking after their friends. And we pretty well did, actually, to be honest. I mean, nothing went through cabinet during my period there, apart from in about the first 2 weeks when Fine Gael tried it on, and then they stopped with the European appointment. Nothing went through cabinet which could be, I think, regarded as massive cronyism. We watched everything like a hawk on that. But the worst form of that cronyism that was going on in Irish life was at the most, and still is, was at the highest, the most important level. And I kind of felt this was difficult. I know a lot of the judges, I know a lot of the politicians, I know how they do it. And I know that the controversy which we're now in the middle of is the product of that, the appointment of Seamus Wolfe. How did it happen? And the fact that there is no transparency at all, particularly at the top level, of such important appointments, I just find terribly offensive. It was also a big challenge because the judiciary and the politicians are so wedded to the current system of patronage. The judges like to appoint, let's be honest about this, the judges like to appoint their pals just as much as the politicians like to appoint their pals. And there's a bit of tension between them, but both of them in the end of the day get a big whack at their pals in there. And so what we don't see is a transparent system of people being appointed on merit. Instead, what we see is politicians choosing out of an enormous pool, basically whoever they like, but the judges having a very large input into that as well. And we see political appointments time after time after time after time. I was determined to try and stop that. And we're very close to it. We're very close to it now, actually. This latest row with Seamus Wolfe's appointment, that is a very good thing that has happened, because that's actually for the first time convinced the public that this is a really serious problem. It's also convinced a lot of politicians they have to do something about it.
But do you not think that there's a certain amount of cronyism is inevitable? I mean, you talk about a massive pool they're drawing from, but really, is it that massive a pool in Ireland where, everybody knows everyone else? Down at the four courts, all the barristers know each other. Half of them are related to each other, or their fathers and mothers have been involved in law, or their children will be. How, are you ever going to be able to eliminate that element of cronyism really in a country the size of Ireland?
You're going to be able to improve it enormously. Elimination is difficult in a small country. You're absolutely right, because people know each other all the time. What I did, and that bill is proposed a bill which has an independent chair on the commission selecting judges and an independent lay majority as well. And that would include lawyers, judges as well, but not as part of the lay majority and not in the chair. That would, I think, you're never going to absolutely sort the problem, because some of those judges who are sitting there are going to have favorites who they want to get through as well, but they're going to be in a minority. And you're going to have an independence in a majority making transparent decisions which the public can see and aware of and how they were made. The system now is absolutely tailor-made for cronyism. It's done behind closed doors. We've seen it. It's all done in secret. That politicians refuse to reveal how it's happened. You saw that in the recent crisis. That because everything that's revealed about it is embarrassing. And in the book, you will see how I address, particularly under the last government, the Fine Gael connections and how they managed to get themselves, how it, maybe it's just a coincidence, but how it happened that so many of them have a Fine Gael background, and how this emerged, and the kind of opaqueness, the invisibility of how it all happens behind closed doors and who appointed to. And it's quite incestuous. It's quite fascinating if you read it, who looked after who in what circumstance, and it's all there actually. It's all in the book, and how they looked after each other in various circumstances. It's completely wrong, and what we want to do is make it open, make it independent. Certainly have a judicial input, and a political input. It has to be eventually, or some political input, but make sure it's not the sort of carry on that's going on at the moment. It's just indefensible.
Yeah, and I the book is very timely, and I would say, because there's still a few people have said to me that they're not quite sure what's going on with this whole Seamus Wolf thing, and if you have any doubts, it is very well laid out in the book about how we got to this stage. So I would recommend it for that reason. There's also some really hilarious descriptions of Fine Gael in the book, and to a lesser extent Fianna Fáil. I just might actually read one of them, which really amused me. And you say, the Blueshirts have many admirable qualities. They're mostly honest, polite, prudent and reliable. They also have a degree of condescension, a sense of a divine right to rule that would embarrass the House of Windsor. They are joined at the hip to Ireland's middle classes and large farmers. Compared with Fianna Fáil, they can be incredibly boring. They would also cut your throat for a few lines of favourable media coverage. They are savages in a savage business, and they would have a good laugh with you afterwards, which I thought was very fitting. Now, West Cork, I'm afraid, is one of the areas that Fine Gael probably don't want to think about at the moment, because they got quite a drubbing in the last election. We did lose that seat that Jim Daly was occupying. Some were saying they were for a constituency that gave us Michael Collins, and I mean the original Michael Collins and the other Michael Collins. Fine Gael were almost wiped out. So can you understand what happened last time around, that things went so badly, and yet here we are again with a Fine Gael coalition government, but I suppose mostly Fine Gael, you would say, really.
Yeah, I mean, the election was obviously not of their timing. Fine Gael's timing. Remember, they didn't want to. I talked to Leo about this at length at the time, urging him not to hold it, because I didn't think we were going to do very well either. But obviously, they had a vote of confidence hanging over their heads against Simon Harris, which was actually going to go through. And so, what he wanted to do was just go before that happened. He didn't want to be forced into an election, and the timing couldn't have been worse for them as a result. It was kind of the middle of winter. They'd done very well on I think they'd done very well on Brexit before that, but the timing of this was the opposition was certainly moving very, very, very fast. Can I understand what happened? No, I was pretty surprised by the depth of what happened. You know, Fine Gael has gone from, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 76 seats in 2011 to about 35 now. That is an incredible decline. And obviously, you know, they're a very conservative party, but so are Fianna Fáil, really. They're very similar. Politically, there's very little difference between them. There's a kind of tribal difference, a cultural difference. So what was happening? I suppose nobody anticipated the rise of Sinn Féin.
Except Sinn Féin, maybe.
Except Sinn Féin, yeah.
Well, not even to the extent, I think that it took them by surprise, really, the extent of it. Yeah,
I mean, even in my own constituency, which is, it's quintessentially middle class. I mean, it's full of people who are well off. Sinn Féin, which it was considered to be the last seat in the country, actually, that would ever elect someone. Sinn Féin, they didn't elect anyone, but if they'd had a really strong candidate, and that's no reflection on the candidate that was there, but a really strong candidate, they might have even got elected there. And it's a hugely middle class area, so that was a big surprise, and they did very, very well. But to say, why is Fine Gael declined so far? You know, it's difficult to know. It's a very volatile electorate, and you did see immediately afterwards, under the COVID regime, kind of interim government, you did see a huge surge in Leo's popularity and Fine Gael's popularity, because they were managing that in the public view very, very, very well. I was in that cabinet, and it was the interim cabinet. It was very strange to see the incredible revival of Fine Gael within weeks of having had a disaster. So ask me, do I know? No, I can't really explain it, except that Sinn Féin, I think, is here to stay.
But what about this rumoured merger of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and especially now that the public has seen them working so closely together with very little difference in policy? Do you think in 5 or 10 years we're going to see like a super party, or is it just the demise of both?
No, I think it probably won't happen like that way. But I think they'll go into coalition pretty easily in future as well. I mean, they are very much still Civil War politics, Civil War parties, and there's a lot of that still there. There's a lot of the families who just would never join the other party, that way. I remember when I was in Fine Gael for that short period of time, I learned very quickly the way to get the support of the people in the room, in the Fine Gael room, was to rattle your sabre at Fianna Fáil. It wasn't about policies at all. It was about the enemy. And once you had an enemy, you were okay. And they live, they kind of feed off each other's enmity. So I don't think they'll merge, but I don't think, I really, one of the most telling things about the present government is, and I'm not a member of it, but I just observing it from outside, is the way that Pascal O'Donoghue and Michael McGrath are getting on. There's no friction between them whatsoever, because they're younger than that Civil War politics kind of era, and their policies are identical. And they're getting on like a house on fire. I don't think there's any tension between them at all, and I suspect that's going to continue. But I don't think there'll be a formal merger. But I think they'll be very comfortable going to government with each other again. Yes, I think that's difficult. The problem in the government will be the Greens. Not Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I don't think so. No.
Right now, the book has just been published in the last few weeks, Shane, and people might know you're a former stockbroker, you're a former and current journalist, and a former politician, or will we see more of you in the politics arena, do you think?
I don't know, it's a difficult question to answer, because I'm not wed to be getting back in the Dáil or anything like that. It's not the biggest trauma of my life that I lost a seat, despite what Michael Collins says.
I think you say it might be the biggest trauma of your family's life, because you're back home now.
Going at home too much, and but COVID has enforced that as well. I don't know. I've got a lot of energy. That's one of the curses I've got, and I'm 71, but I've still got an awful lot of energy. So I'm not going to retire voluntarily. If I can't get anything to do, that'd be a pity. But I expect to be energetic, keep doing a lot of things. I'd like to be politically involved. I would certainly like to be involved in various campaigns. That is very interesting. I'd like to see this be part of, I'd like to see the judicial appointments bill go through. I think it probably will now in an amended form. And I'd certainly be involved on the sidelines of pushing that, because that's actually, that was a bill I introduced, and it's nearly there. And it's obviously going to be reintroduced in some form now. And I'd certainly like to use the kind of energy which I've used in politics. I was there for 39 years. It's a long time, and so you don't want to make a complete break. But I'm not going to be kind of spending the next few years mourning the fact that I'm not in the Dáil. It's great freedom in some ways that you're not there. Being a minister is hugely rewarding, and I hope sometimes you do a lot of good, but it's hugely stressful. And people think it's all about the stuff I said in the book. I left out of the book the grind, and that's most of your life actually, is the grind. It's the briefings, it's the documents you have to read and actually absorb and then make decisions on. That's the difficulty. So no, I'd like to keep writing. I'm writing a good bit at the moment, and that's fun, and the book's been fun. But actually, I won't make up my mind about what to do next until after Christmas, because really the book, we had the interim government, which lasted till June. Then I immediately did about 4 months on the book, bang, 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 bang. And I'm kind of promoting it at the moment from now until the shops. You see, the shops open on next Wednesday. I assume, we haven't got the news, but I think so. So that'll be really when the books start selling, if they sell at all. Which I think they will. So after that, I look at it. But sure, I'd like to be involved in things that similar and things that matter. But people say to you, standing for the Dáil, they only want to know because they want to see if there's a vacancy or another, somebody else in the area. Really, that's why they ask that question. They're not worried about what you're going to do.
Well, tell me, have you just described there, you don't really have much downtime at the moment, but if you did, like what does Shane Ross watch on Netflix for a bit of downtime? Or are you just going through old episodes of The West Wing to keep your hand in there in the political arena?
No, I tell you what I've been doing. I've been doing a downtime recently. I have been watching The Crown, like everybody else. That's almost cliched already, and it's only out last weekend, wasn't it? Or the weekend before. And I have been watching elements of that. I don't watch. I started watching film last night, and it was just so bloody. It was about saboteurs in the war, and it was horrible. So I didn't watch that for much very length of time. What will I do with downtime? I will probably, I tell you what, I've developed a great deal of interest in football. I'd always, as Minister of Sport, it was. I went to all the football games and all the rugby games.
You mentioned Scunthorpe or Blackburn or.
You read the book. Yeah,
yes.
You did. That's my grandchildren. My grandchild, one of my grandchildren, for some reason, I can't believe it. He said he supports Manchester United and Scunthorpe, and I said, well, okay, let's go. We'll go to. We went to one Manchester United game, and then he said, I want to go to Scunthorpe, and I didn't know where Scunthorpe was, and it's somewhere in Yorkshire, and we went to a game in Scunthorpe, which are 4th division now, just about to drop out of the 4th division, I think, probably. And he announced to me as we got there. He said, this Scunthorpe was awarded the dirtiest town in England last year, which we're just as we got in there. And we went there, and they actually got promoted that day, so it was great. But no, I've been watching a lot of Manchester United on telly. I mean, it's one of the great things about one of the great reliefs of COVID is at least there's some sport on telly still. Even though we can't go, thank God we can still watch it on television. So I've been watching it. I was watching the Champions League last night, night before, etc. And I've become a bit of a soccer football addict at this stage.
You've been watching some of the coverage of Maradona's death. Yeah,
that was really moving, and it's going to be quite staggering in the next few days. Obviously, he's doing the 3-day. One of the things that struck me, I don't know if that's appropriate, was I didn't realize what a difficult life he'd had as well. I wasn't up to speed with that, and that he'd been involved in all sorts of things, and he was out of shape. He was out of shape, obviously, recently. So it wasn't all triumph and all that fame and money, etc. It hadn't left him in good health, and he'd had some real downside.
But it just shows that the country still stood by him, and they still have a very very fond. A great place in their hearts for him, despite all his troubles in the last few years, which I thought was nice.
You're right. That was the interesting thing. That he did some bad things, obviously, or stupid things, and yet people still absolutely adored him because of his talent and his personality. But he kind of didn't look great in the latter years, which was sad to see. And I always remember him as the photographs we're seeing this morning. This incredibly, I don't know, he's good looking, but glamorous kind of young man, and he wasn't that, and he wasn't in good shape, which is a pity.
And Shane, have you seen the Queen's Gambit? Because I'd imagine that's something that you'd really appreciate.
No, but I have that in mind. Very short. Have you?
I have. Let me recommend it, and I think you'd love it, because chess, no more than any other game of strategy, there's a lot of similarities with politics in it. So I think
chess is a good game.
You should watch that.
I have a bit of an ambition to play a bit more chess. I used to play chess a lot, and it's a fascinating game. Yeah, it's absolutely. I'll watch that. That'll be Christmas.
There you go.
Lovely at Christmas.
Well, listen, Shane, thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck. And I highly recommend the book. I think whether you're a fan of the Blueshirts or you're a Fianna Fáiler, or if you have any kind of political nerdiness in you at all, I think you really enjoy it. It's a really good, and at most times very funny actually read. So thank you for that, and well done.
Thank you so much, and tell Michael Collins I love him. All right. Okay.
I'll pass it on. And so to this week's newspaper. Our lead story is about the move to level 3 restrictions and how that might affect our local pubs, which are really struggling at the moment. We also have an interesting story about how the most popular word searches on Google for West Cork during the pandemic are beaches and Airbnb. We also have details of a nice award for Skibbereen in the Pride of Place ceremony last week. Inside, we have a story on a wonderful painting of Irish female politicians that also features West Cork's first ever female TD, Margaret Murphy O'Mahony, who was, of course, elected in 2016. There's also a warning for West Cork craft retailers from economist Jim Power about changes to the VAT refund scheme. And we have the news of a top crime novel award this week for Clonakilty author and recent podcast interviewee, Louise O'Neill. In features, we have the story of the Timoleague-born Labour TD who is being remembered by this year's Mother Jones Festival, and we also look at a timely name change for the local youth branch of Fianna Fáil. In property, we have a renovated farmhouse near Ballinadee on 40 acres. And in motoring, we are reviewing the new Audi A6. In our second section, we have Emma Conley's COVID diary and all our usual columnists, as well as local news from every corner of West Cork. So don't forget, if you can't get to the shops, you can subscribe online by going to thesouthernstarTV and clicking on the e-paper tab. Or call the office on 028 21200 for a postal copy to be sent out to you. And now for this week's musical treat. Aine O'Gorman is a singer-songwriter based in Ballinadee. She has just released a song with Victoria Keating, who is based in Bandon. The song, The Poor Ground, was recorded with Martin Leahy and was written about the Tuam babies. Christy Moore described the song as a tour de force.
When I began to love our refuge, a dream, I lost my hold on earth. When I began to love, when I began to love, a tiny spark that burned just for a little while. When I began to love, when your essence leaves and your thoughts they creep, and it hurts to breathe, 'cause you cannot tell me where you might be found in the poorest ground. Not a single sound, only memory. The shadows close our eyes. Let go our little hands. The sighing larkspur song and sapphire kisses sand. When we began to love, they found us new as day beneath the blessed cross. They carried us away. When your essence deeps and your thoughts they creep, and it hurts to breathe, 'cause you cannot tell me where you might be found in the poorest ground. Not a single sound, only memory. Don't forget us.
Thank you for listening to the Southern Star Coronavirus Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast, which is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.